Hi friends, I want to tell you a story today. It's a very special story, and it happened a long time ago. And for this story, you'll need to see a few things in my hands. So here we go, let's begin. A long time ago, there was a monk living in India, and he had lived there for quite some time. He had devoted his whole life to his worship. And while he was there, he chose to take a vow of silence. So he didn't speak. Could you imagine not speaking? What would that feel like? Yeah, I love to speak and communicate. I know you do too. Well, this monk took a vow of silence to not speak so that he could listen to what was in his heart and all of the things that he was learning all around him in his time. But he really loved to write. He really loved to write. He had a lot of thoughts and a lot of ideas. And so he would often take a long stick out into the sand and he would write in swirls. And it looked a little like this. He would start in the center and he would write and he would write and he would write around and around and around in circles forever and ever. He'd spend his days out there writing in the sand with his stick, around and around and around and around and around, and other monks would pass him by and they would think to themselves, is he going to write forever? Is he ever going to stop? When will there be a stop to his writing? What does he have to say? What's interesting to him? What is he thinking about? But the other monks never stopped and bothered him. They did not distract him. They let him do his work of writing. And he would write and he would write and he would write around and around and around in the sand. And eventually one day he said, he thought to himself, I need to know when to stop. I need to know when to stop my writing. I don't know exactly how to do that. And you see, this was a long time ago. So long ago that they didn't even have pencils and erasers. That's how long ago this story is taking place. So this monk invented something. He needed a stop sign to tell himself and others who might read his work where to stop. And he thought for a long time about how he could finish off his swirl of writing in the sand. And finally he decided to put a little dot. It might have looked like this. So after a long time of writing in the sand with his stick, he put a dot and made it stop. And on another day, he made more swirls in the sand of all the beautiful things he wanted to write about. And every time he finished, he would put a little to stop. He didn't really have a name for it. I think you know what we call it now. But way back then, there was no name. He just put a stop. Well, something fascinating was happening, though. There was one day where he wrote something incredibly exciting, a huge discovery he had made, and he wasn't quite sure if a stop was good enough. He thought to himself, well, stops are great, but this was an exciting thing that he had written down. And it needed an exciting mark. And it was probably a lot like throwing a ball with your friends. Maybe when you get a home run and you knock it right out of the park. It was exciting like that. And so he put a long stick, kind of like a baseball bat, because it was so exciting. He put a long stick on top of his stop, just like this. A stick with a stop to show how exciting it was, like when you play baseball and you knock it out of the park. It's a pretty exciting thing to happen. Another day passed and he was writing again, and this time he realized something different was happening in his writing once more. It wasn't just a stop, and it wasn't an exciting stop. In fact, it was a question. And he couldn't quite think what to put at the end of this. he thought for a long time, well, this isn't an exciting thing. This isn't a stop. This is something different. It needs to end differently. I need to know the answer to this thought that I'm having. And he thought a lot about how hooked he was on this idea. He couldn't let it go. He was thinking about it for days and days and days. He just didn't know how to stop this story that he had written. It wasn't the same as all the other ones. He was so hooked on this idea, he imagined what it would be like to be a fish and hooked on a hook when you go fishing. And you can't let go no matter what you do. You are hooked. It was a lot like that, his thought. And so he imagined, well, if I am hooked on this idea and I can't let it go and I definitely need an answer, then maybe a hook is the right symbol. And so, out of metal, he fashioned himself a hook. He was hooked on the idea, and he put the hook on top of his stop. And every day since then, people have written with these 3 different kinds of stops. A full stop, an exciting stop, and a questioning stop, when you just don't know what comes next and you're hooked on getting an answer to that question. Today we call these 3 things, say it if you know, period, exclamation mark, and question mark. These are the 3 different ways that we end our sentences when we're writing. So the next time you're writing, maybe in the sand with a stick like the monk in this story, think about how you're going to stop your writing. Will you put a period? Will you put an exclamation mark and knock it out of the park with excitement? Will you put a question mark to keep people hooked, to keep yourself hooked on what you're writing and what you're thinking about? These are all really great thoughts, and I hope you liked this story. So for my educator friends watching, this is a very simple story that you can do that uses these 3 little materials. You can find these in the Safari, or you can make one out of wood. This is just a paper clip bent, and this is a long red string with a button on the end. I hope you like this story. It leaves a great impression in the child's mind of why we end sentences the way that we do. And this story has a bit of truth behind it as well, but it's also leaving a big, huge, wide open space for imagination. So see you next time. Let me know if you have any questions.